Hello, and welcome to Jonathan Tobin Daily. I'm JNS Editor-in-Chief Jonathan Tobin. Thanks for joining me for another discussion on the most pressing issues in the Jewish world. Please like, subscribe, and give us good reviews when you listen to the show. Now let's get started. In the fall of 2022, the left-leaning mainstream media did almost everything they could to help the then flagging senatorial candidacy of John Fetterman. Nearly 3 years later, liberal corporate outlets seemed to be intent on destroying him, with reports claiming to detail his aberrant behavior, questionable health, and devastating comments from former staffers and even from his wife, Giselle Barreto Fetterman. What's behind the change in their attitude? One thing known for sure is that it's not the ostensible issue driving a flood of stories casting doubt on Fetterman's state of mind and fitness for office. And just like the same outlets' disgraceful cover-up of former President Joe Biden's mental incapacity, something that became obvious during his disastrous presidential debate with Donald Trump in June 2024, it ended once it was clear that he couldn't win re-election. The turn against Fetterman is devastating evidence of the media's lack of credibility. The shifting narrative about the senator is an object lesson in how to read the contemporary liberal press. It's why even those most reluctant to write off legacy media as partisan propaganda outlets need to acknowledge that 21st century journalism is broken beyond repair. The same outlets now skewering him as a sick man who has lost control of himself and hinting at the need for him to resign were singing a far different tune in 2022 when they steadfastly stuck to the story that there was nothing wrong with a man who suffered a devastating stroke only days before he won his party's nomination for a Pennsylvania U.S. Senate seat. That support from liberal outlets required some journalists to blatantly lie about his condition, alleging that any reporting to the contrary about his health was Republican disinformation. That helped him win that November, though a lot of the credit for his victory also belongs to the dismal, out-of-touch performance of his GOP opponent, Dr. Mehmet Oz. The liberal press never budged from that line, even after Fetterman took office in 2023, endured some difficult first weeks on Capitol Hill, and was then hospitalized for depression. He recovered and returned to his regular duties, albeit still relying on digital devices with closed caption technology as a result of what he said was a temporary speech impediment related to the stroke. Anyone who questioned whether a U.S. senator ought to rely on this method to conduct conversations and listen to speeches was damned as a bigoted, ableist opponent of the disabled. But by the end of his first year in office, the cheerleading and or covering for Fetterman ceased. Why was that? The answer can be summed up in one word: Israel. Fetterman reacted to the Hamas-led Palestinian Arab terror assaults on southern Israel on October 7, 2023, not just with anger and horror. Unlike most Democrats who spent the subsequent months demanding a ceasefire that would allow the Hamas terrorist organization to emerge as the victor of the war it started, Fetterman was having none of that. He immediately made it clear that he was determined to support the Jewish state's efforts to defeat and eradicate Hamas, and that blame for all of the casualties in the post-October 7th war belonged to the Islamist group and not the Jewish state. Indeed, Fetterman has become a hero to the pro-Israel community in the last 19 months for his unwavering support, which is undiluted by any willingness to pay lip service to the left's false claims that the Jewish state is committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. Along with Representative Richie Torres, he is among the few Democrats who have stood by Jerusalem during the crisis without wavering. Nor has he talked out of both sides of his mouth, damning the Israelis for overreacting to the events of October 7th, or praising the idealism of the pro-Hamas mobs on college campuses, as did former President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. To say that his stand on Israel has come as a shock to fellow Democrats, especially the left-wing activists who carried him to victory in a May 2022 Pennsylvania Democratic primary against a credible moderate alternative, and an attractive representative of the African-American community is an understatement. It's hard to imagine any Pennsylvania Democrat, including Governor Josh Shapiro, who is Jewish, Fetterman is not, trolling pro-Hamas demonstrators at his office and home by waving an Israeli flag while they chanted about genocide, or by hanging outside the door of his Washington office posters of men, women, and children of different nationalities who were kidnapped by Hamas and murdered there or along the way or held captive for days and months. Even more to the point, as numerous accounts make clear, Fetterman's staff and even his wife have become outraged by his support for Israel, a position that marks him as an outlier in his party. Fetterman has shown some other signs of moderation since October 7th, notably his willingness to meet with President Donald Trump after his November 2024 election victory and to vote for a couple of his cabinet appointees. But on the whole, he stuck to his liberal positions on a host of other economic and even social issues, such as his support for trans rights, and voted against most of Trump's choices. That stance even started a boomlet among some pro-Israel Democrats, proposing Fetterman as a long-shot possibility for the 2028 presidential nomination, in which he would be the centrist alternative in a party increasingly dominated by supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That unlikely prospect aside, it is his supposed apostasy about Israel that is driving the anger against him from the progressive wing of his party. This is the only explanation for liberal journalist Volte-Face on the question of his health and fitness for office. The story that started the tsunami of negative coverage of Fetterman was a lengthy profile in New York Magazine titled, "All by Himself. John Fetterman insists he is in good health, but staffers past and present say they no longer recognize the man they once knew." The main on-the-record source for the piece was his former chief of staff, Adam Gentleson, a veteran left-wing Democratic operative. Like most Democratic congressional staffers on Capitol Hill, Gentleson is an opponent of Israel, thought the Biden-Harris ambivalent stand on the post-October 7th war was insufficiently hostile to the Jewish state. He ultimately resigned, and along with others who didn't speak on the record, is at pains to hint that Fetterman's backing for Israel and refusal to play along with Hamas talking points signify signs of his mental instability. That story spawned articles in outlets like the New York Times, The Atlantic, Politico, NBC News, and CBS News, in which Democrats, both anonymous and on the record, shaded Fetterman and depicted him as a deeply disturbed and unstable person in need of medical care. And they say he has no business being in the Senate. Is there a possibility that they are at least partially correct about Fetterman's health? Maybe. As someone who myself cast doubt on his fitness for office when liberals were pretending there was nothing to see, I'm prepared to accept that some of the current reporting about his health might be accurate. But I also know that the sudden interest in his well-being on the part of the liberal press has nothing to do with any alleged change for the worse in his condition. While he may still be impaired, as journalists like Selena Zito have reported, since his hospitalization in early 2023, he has managed to do his job for the past 2 years as reasonably well as most of his colleagues, though, admittedly, that is a pretty low standard by which to judge anyone. As such, it's blatantly obvious that the motivation for the media offensive against Fetterman is about politics, not health. The reason that the same publications, networks, and journalists that spent 4 years declaring that there was nothing wrong with Biden are now sounding the alarm about the senator is because he isn't useful to them anymore. If he were behaving like other left-wing Democrats and criticizing Israel, the odds that New York Magazine, The Times, or any of the other outlets seeking to depict him as unworthy of a Senate seat would today be ignoring any concerns about his condition. While this single demonstration of the media's corruption and utter lack of credibility is disturbing in and of itself, it's just another instance of why so much of what the mainstream corporate media publishes should be read with a truckload of salt. Media bias is nothing new, but it's gotten to the point where stories that are clearly part of a partisan information operation are the norm rather than unusual. As Ruthie Bloom wrote in JNS about a recent media attempt to sow dissension between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government in Israel, This sort of thing is now ubiquitous. At least in America, we have come to the point where it's impossible to avoid the conclusion that much of what is printed in the mainstream press must be discounted as nothing more than political disinformation. In the meantime, regardless of concerns about his health, Fetterman still deserves the applause and gratitude of voters for his courage in standing up against the political fashion of his party when it comes to the war against Israel. Whatever else you might think of him, he is an authentic, if eccentric character. His penchant for wearing hoodies and shorts to work is something that has angered his Senate colleagues, who connects with ordinary working-class voters in a way that most Democrats cannot. While he may well face a tough left-wing primary challenge when he runs for re-election, those who underestimate his political appeal in a state and a country sick of partisan ideological polarization do so at their own peril. Liberals tolerated an infirm and incapable president simply because they thought it helped keep Trump out of the White House. Friends of the Jewish state should therefore be forgiven for being willing to put up with an irascible and moody senator from Pennsylvania who needs technological assistance to do his job, but has shown integrity and character when it comes to the post-October 7th surge of anti-Semitism that other members of his party have either tolerated or encouraged. Thanks for listening. Please remember to tune in every day for Jonathan Tobin Daily Edition and every week for Think Twice, my full-length JNS TV program. Whether you're listening to us on any of the podcast platforms or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to JNS, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at thinktwice@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself.